Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking at something I think will really resonate with everyone here at the intersection of media power and history.
Yeah, it should be pretty fascinating stuff.
We're going to be looking at the work of Ricky Sutton, the author of the Future Media Newsletter. Are you familiar with his work at all?
Yeah, I've seen some of his stuff. Interesting guy.
Yeah, so Sutton has done some really interesting research, drawing some compelling parallels between Napoleon's manipulation of the press way back when and the strategies we see with figures like Donald Trump and even companies like Meta today.
Yeah, that's a fascinating comparison for sure. It's a long read, but really thought-provoking.
So that's what we're going to be diving into today. The question is, what can history teach us about those who seek to control the free press for power and wealth? I mean, Napoleon, Trump, Zuckerberg, that's quite the lineup.
Yeah, it is an eclectic bunch for sure. But there are some definite through lines there in terms of their approach to media.
So let's start with Napoleon. You know, he was a master of shaping public perception. I mean, he even had that famous quote, the men who have changed the universe have never succeeded by capturing the leaders, but by addressing the masses.
Oh yeah, that's a classic. And it's so relevant to today's world too, with social media and
It
everything.
really is. It's like he was predicting the rise of the influencer.
Well, speaking of influencers, did you know Napoleon was actually inspired by Julius Caesar and his Commentarii? Caesar used that to build his image and influence public opinion.
Oh, wow. So Napoleon was taking notes from the OG influencer.
Exactly. He saw the power of shaping the narrative, and he used that to his advantage. And Napoleon didn't waste any time. He launched his own military newspaper pretty early in his career.
Le Courrier, right?
That's the one. He used it to build himself up as this heroic figure, rally his troops, garner political support.
Sounds a lot like modern-day political
Oh,
campaigns.
absolutely. And he was really good at it too. You can see it in his battle reports, full of vivid descriptions emphasizing his tactical genius.
Classic propaganda.
Absolutely. He knew how to control the narrative around his campaigns.
But he didn't stop there, did he? He went all in on controlling the French press.
No, he didn't. Licensing requirements, reducing the number of papers, launching his own publications. It was a full-on media domination strategy.
He was serious about it.
Oh, yeah. And, he poured massive amounts of money into it, billions in today's currency. He understood that controlling the media was essential to achieving his goals.
So, okay, that's Napoleon Master, manipulator of the press.
Right.
But how does this connect to Trump and Meta?
Well, Sutton argues that there are some really striking similarities between the political landscapes of revolutionary France and modern America.
Like what?
Well, think about it. Wealth inequality, nationalism, political polarization, all happening amidst these emerging technologies. It's kind of eerie how much it rhymes with history.
It's a little scary, honestly.
Right.
Like we haven't learned from the past.
Right.
Yeah.
And the parallels go beyond just the broader context. Napoleon said, "If I were to give liberty to the press, my power could not last 3 days." Fast forward to today. You've got Trump constantly attacking fake news.
Yeah, that fear of a free press seems to be a recurring theme throughout history.
Definitely. And there are even similarities in their rhetoric. Both of them champion the common people against this corrupt elite. They emphasize their own leadership as vital, and they foster loyalty by creating divisions.
It's a familiar playbook for sure,
Yeah.
but clearly it still works.
It does. And that's where Meta comes in.
Okay, so where does Meta fit into all of this? This is where things start to get really interesting.
Right. Well, Sutton points to Trump's alleged relationship with Zuckerberg and how Meta kind of shifted its content moderation policies around that same time.
Wait, were we talking about those accusations that Facebook tweaked its algorithms to favor right-leaning content?
Exactly. Now,
Yeah.
we need to be careful here. These are allegations, not proven facts. But Sutton raises some interesting questions about Zuckerberg's motivations.
Such as,
Well, Meta was facing those antitrust lawsuits, remember? And there was a definite shift to the right happening politically. And of course, Zuckerberg has a huge interest in protecting Meta's reach.
yeah, I mean, 3.3 billion users? That's a lot of influence.
It is. So the question is, was Zuckerberg trying to appease Trump and the right to avoid scrutiny? It's a possibility, but we have to be clear. We're just exploring the possibilities here.
Right, of course.
Oh.
So where do we go from here?
Well, let's unpack the potential consequences of this kind of information control and what lessons we can learn from history.
Okay, I'm ready for part two. Okay, so we've got Napoleon manipulating the press, building his image, consolidating power. And now we're seeing these potential parallels with Trump and Meta in the digital age It's kind of a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff for sure. And Sutton's really concerned about the long-term consequences of this kind of information manipulation.
Like, what are we talking about here? What's the worst case scenario?
I mean, just think about it. Erosion of trust in institutions,
Mhm.
spread of misinformation,
Hmm.
and the rise of, what's called demagoguery.
Demagoguery. Okay, that's not a word you hear every day.
Yeah, it basically means leaders who exploit people's fears and prejudices. To gain power, they rely on emotional appeals, misinformation, instead of, rational
This
arguments.
sounds like fear-mongering, basically.
Exactly. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of that in recent history.
Yeah, it's scary how effective that can be.
It is. And, it's even more effective now with the way information is consumed these days.
What do you mean?
Well, think about social media. Algorithms curate what we see. Personalized feeds create these echo chambers. People are mainly exposed to information that confirms what they already believe.
Right. So you're constantly being fed content you already agree with. You never have to confront opposing viewpoints
Exactly. And that makes people so much more susceptible to manipulation.
because they're not questioning what they're seeing.
Right. They're not considering alternative perspectives. They become passive consumers of information.
So we're all living in our own little bubbles.
Kind of. And those bubbles can be easily manipulated.
So where does this all lead? I mean, did Napoleon's grip on the media help him hold on to power forever?
Well, no, actually, it backfired in the end.
How so?
Well, his control-based approach led to a lot of resentment among the French people. The economy struggled under his rule, and his tactics led to resistance, both at home and abroad.
So it's like he built his whole empire on a shaky foundation.
Exactly. And eventually that foundation crumbled.
Okay, so controlling the message can only get you so far.
Right. Eventually, reality catches up.
Interesting. So to kind of hammer this point home, Sutton actually did something pretty unique. He consulted ChatGPT. Wait, he fed historical data into an AI chatbot. Okay, I have to hear this.
Yeah, it sounds kind of crazy, but the results are fascinating. ChatGPT essentially echoed those lessons of history, highlighted how fragile Napoleon's system was.
What did it say specifically?
Well, it said that Napoleon's regime relied on expansion, coercion, and propaganda, making it brittle in the face of prolonged conflict, economic strain, and nationalist resistance.
So even AI can see the patterns of history.
Right, and the dangers of unchecked power.
It's like a warning from the future.
It kind of is, and it brings us back to those parallels with Trump and Meta. If they're relying on similar tactics to control the narrative, they might face similar challenges down the road.
So what can we do?
Hmm.
What can we as leaders in media, tech, and advertising do to avoid making the same mistakes?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think it starts with recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping the information landscape.
Okay, but what does that look like in practice? How do we actually make a difference?
Well, first, we need to be mindful of our own biases
Right.
and the impact of our actions, the decisions we make, the campaigns we run, the algorithms we design. They all have consequences. We need to ask ourselves, are we contributing to a healthier information ecosystem, or are we part of the problem?
It's like a doctor taking the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. But it's not enough to just avoid doing bad things. We need to actively promote good things.
Apparently, we need to champion transparency, accuracy, accountability.
Okay, I like that. But how do we actually do that?
Well, we need to be critical consumers of information ourselves. Encourage that same critical thinking in others. Support organizations committed to truth and factual reporting.
So like investigative journalism, fact-checking initiatives.
Exactly. Those are the things that can help us fight back against misinformation.
I see your point.
Yep.
But how do we get the average person to care about this stuff? It's so easy to feel overwhelmed and just tune it all out.
I think it comes down to showing people why it matters to them personally, How does misinformation impact their lives? How can being a more informed citizen lead to better decisions? We need to make this relevant and relatable, not just some abstract academic debate.
So connect the dots between history, current events, and people's everyday lives.
Right. Show them that the fight for a free press is not just some dusty old ideal. It's a battle that's happening right now,
Yeah.
and it has real consequences for all of us.
I like that. And it brings us back to Sutton's central question. What can history teach us about those who seek to control the free press? Well, it seems like the answer is that in the long run, their efforts are often unsustainable. Like you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial for us to be vigilant, hold those in power accountable, and empower people with the tools they need to navigate this complex information landscape.
So what's the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with today?
I think it's this. We're all part of the story now. The future of information is not something that's happening to us. It's something we're actively shaping with every choice we make.
That's a powerful thought. And a good place to leave it for now. We'll be back with part 3 where we'll dive even deeper into these issues. It feels like we're at a turning point. The way we create and consume information is changing so rapidly. And this research on Napoleon Trump and Meta, it really highlights the risks involved with this whole shift.
Yeah, it does. But I also think it's a huge opportunity. We can learn from history, chart a new path. I mean, think about all the tools at our disposal. We can fact check stuff instantly, connect with people across the globe, build communities around shared values.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. But of course, with great power comes great responsibility.
Right.
How do we make sure these tools are used ethically, for good and not manipulation?
That's the big question, isn't it? It starts with being aware of our own actions, you know?
Yeah.
As leaders in media, tech, and advertising, we have to be ethical stewards of information.
So practically speaking, what can we do differently?
Transparency is key. Being upfront about our biases, our motivations, where our information comes from. If we're running an ad campaign, let's be clear about who's paying for it, what their agenda might be.
So no more hiding behind vague language or misleading stats, basically.
Exactly. Honesty with ourselves and our audience. And along with transparency, accuracy is crucial. Let's double check our facts, cite sources, be willing to admit when we're wrong.
It's not about being perfect. It's about trying to get it right.
Exactly. And then there's accountability. How do we hold people accountable for spreading misinformation?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is. We have to support those independent fact-checking groups, put pressure on social media platforms to do more to stop the spread of misinformation. We also need to educate people, give them the tools to be more discerning.
Teach them how to fish instead of just giving them a fish.
Precisely. And that's where a free and independent press is so vital. Those journalists who are committed to investigative reporting, holding the powerful accountable, they are more important than ever.
They are. It's like that old saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant. When information flows freely and openly, it's so much harder for people to manipulate things behind the scenes.
Couldn't agree more. And that's what makes this whole discussion about Napoleon, Trump, and Meta so relevant. It reminds us that this fight for control over information, it's not ancient history, it's happening right now. And the stakes are high.
So what's the takeaway here? What do you really want our listeners to remember?
Be mindful. Be intentional. Be an active participant in shaping the information landscape. The choices we make, they determine the future of information and ultimately the future of our democracy.
Wow, that's a powerful thought and a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone listening has too.
It's been a pleasure.